Jessica, what are some common signs that someone might have an unexpected exposure to mold?
So the thing with mold exposure, it's really tricky because it can look different in different people. Everybody's body is different. Everybody's immune system is different. Every exposure is different. But some commonalities that I tend to see is it presents as mystery illness. This is one of the things we hear people talk about in this community is that I was sick for years. I had all these random symptoms that didn't add up to any particular diagnosis. And I kept being told, nothing's wrong with you. You know, your blood work is fine. Your this is fine. Your that is fine. You're fine. When in fact, the person was not fine and they knew they were not fine. We also see a lot of misdiagnoses, common misdiagnoses because of the way that mold illness or mold toxicity can present. It's an inflammatory process. So we call it CIRS, C-I-R-S, chronic inflammatory response syndrome is typically what we're referring to when we're saying someone is sick from mold. And what that means is that virtually every system of the body can be affected in an inflammatory manner. And inflammation can do crazy things. It can do different things to different parts of your body. It can manifest in different ways. It can manifest in your brain as brain fog or, you know, loss of ability to find the right word or short-term memory loss, confusion, anxiety, depression, insomnia. These are all really common symptoms of mold that are written off as just like everyday symptoms that, you know, you're aging, you're a mom, you're busy, you know, you're working, you're stressed, you're this, you're that. We see a lot of common misdiagnoses. So chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple sclerosis, multiple autoimmune diseases, hormone dysregulation, menopause or perimenopause, thyroid dysfunction, psychological issues, psychiatric issues, all of this hypochondria, all of these things are very common sort of misdiagnoses for when it's actually mold. And we also see a lot of sort of syndromes that are very common with mold illness that I like to call out because sometimes people come to me and say, I have all these syndromes and they haven't yet figured out that the root cause is an environmentally acquired illness like mold. Some of those multiple chemical sensitivity is really common in the mold community. People who get affected by mold often end up with multiple chemical sensitivity, meaning they can't handle normal smells, right? So like laundry detergent smells or fabric softener or diesel fuel or just everyday smells that most people don't even notice can become extremely intense for these people and make them really ill. They can get, you know, nauseous, headache, anxiety spikes. They get physically ill from this stuff. So that's chemical sensitivity. Mast cell activation syndrome, also known as MCAS, is a really common sort of byproduct of CIRS or mold illness. And that's another inflammatory process that becomes multi-systemic in terms of symptoms. POTS is another one. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's like, you know, you start having problems with blood pressure. I had this for a while I was living in mold. I would bend down to pick something up and pass out. It's weird heartbeat things happening. Pandas and pans, especially in children, are really common. SIBO, digestive issues, food sensitivities, all of these things are very, very common in someone who's mold sick. And it's when they finally get this diagnosis or finally find out or find it in their house and realize, oh, it's mold. That has been the root cause all along for all of these things is when it all becomes very clear and it comes together. But until that point, it looks like this, you know, smorgasbord of symptoms that nobody can put together.
Yeah. I mean, when it's clear why it's so confusing to people because it's so many disparate systems throughout the body. Makes a lot of sense what you said, that inflammation can create problems everywhere. And then that's going to express in different people differently. But it must be such a relief when someone is dealing with that extent of things or like you said, a smorgasbord, a piece of it here, a piece of it there, and then can finally piece it together. If someone is listening to this or knows somebody who's got some of those ongoing symptoms, the mystery illness they just haven't been able to solve, and they want to consider mold, can they do that through hiring an inspector like you? Do they need to start with a practitioner and get some kind of testing, or is it depend?
You could go either way. If you have a good mold literate medical practitioner near you, you can start there, and they can, there's different types of testing they can do. There's urine mycotoxin testing they can do to get a gauge on what kind of mycotoxin load, which is the toxin that toxic molds produce. There are multiple types of toxins produced that can show up in your body and therefore be excreted in your urine. So we can check that. There's different types of testing that they can do, and also look for different inflammatory markers that we know are consistent with someone who's sick from mold. Or you can start with the house. There's all different things we can do. There's testing. We can DIY. We can bring in an inspector. Thinking about the history of your house is pretty important if you know it, if you've been in it a while, and thinking about those water damage events that people tend to write off, things that may have happened that you didn't think were a big deal. But if you can start to understand that it doesn't take much for a water event to turn into mold, then maybe you might want to prioritize looking at the home if you know you've had some previous history with water damage.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it comes back to finding a really skilled mold literate professional, whatever that is, and going from there. So if you think this might apply to you, Jessica and I recorded a longer episode where we go more in detail about mold. It's the very next episode in the playlist of this show. Go check it out. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.